Before we begin the Desmos project, it's important that we walk through the rubric and understand exactly what we need to have in our artwork project. The requirements are listed in this table here, and most of the requirements are functions that need to be part of your art. To start, you need to include 4 linear functions that are cut off on the ends in some way, meaning we'll need those restrictions that we talked about in the intro video for all of these functions. Linear functions start with this parent function here, y equals x, or f of x equals x, since they're the same thing. And you can use all the transformations on that parent function to get your lines. However, remember that linear functions are just y equals mx plus b. So if you'd rather think about them in that regard, it's the exact same thing. I move it up and down with this number at the end, and then I change the slope or stretch/shrink my graph with m. So that is something to consider, but your graph needs to have at least 4 straight lines in it. In addition to having 4 linear functions, you need to have at least 1 quadratic. Quadratic is f of x equals x squared. So it's that parabola shape. Looks like this, a U. You'll also need an exponential function. That one kind of looks like this kind of curve shape. And that occurs when x is in the exponent. When you are typing exponential functions into Desmos and you want to move them left and right, I will warn you that Desmos is a little picky, and that in order to put something up in the exponent with the x, you have to put parentheses around it first. So for example, if I wanted to move this graph to the right 3 units, I would have to put parentheses x minus 3 in order to keep that minus 3 up in the exponent and not have it drop down and make it move down 3 units instead of right 3 units. So that is just something to consider as well when you're using Desmos. The next thing that we need to have is an absolute value function. So that is the one that looks like a V shape. We will also need a cubic function that looks kind of like this squiggly line here, not the best drawn, and a square root function that looks like this, a curve with an endpoint there. So those are all the functions that need to be included in your art. In addition to those functions, I am going to be checking to make sure that you've used vertical and horizontal translations, meaning you've moved it up and down or left and right in some way. And this doesn't have to be for all functions, just for at least one of them. You also have to have at least 1 squish, where you multiply your function by a number, and at least 1 reflection, where you put a negative in front and flip it upside down. If you have met all these requirements, you should be good to go, as long as your artwork is your own and it's creative and well thought out. So this is an important checklist to come back to, especially right before you submit, making sure you've met all these requirements. If you get close to being done and you realize you're missing some of the functions or the requirements, one option for you is to go ahead and write a word next to your artwork using functions that you are missing in your artwork. I've had this happen before where students make a really cool design and then they need to get other functions in there, so they write the name of the design or a title or their name in order to get the missing functions. Now that we've discussed all of the requirements that need to be met for your Desmos artwork project, let's do a quick little example together. So in this example, essentially what I'm going to be doing is starting my own little mini Desmos artwork project and showing you how I work through it step by step. So the first thing you'll need to do is decide what image or artwork you would like to create. So brainstorm a little bit, but don't spend too much time on that because we really need to dive in and start building it. I'm going to do a really simple example here, and I'm going to make a smiley face. So to start, I am going to want my smiley face to be inside a large circle. Now, I can look in my notes or in the Desmos intro video to find the equation of a circle, which is going to require me to put in the center and the radius. So I would like my circle to be centered at let's say 10 comma 10. So I'm going to have x minus 10 squared plus y minus 10 squared, and so that will center it at 10 comma 10 in that first quadrant. And then the radius is squared on the other side of the equal sign, and I get to choose that number as well. If I wanted a really small circle, 9 would be a good choice. It would have a radius of 3. But that's a little too small for me. I would like to have maybe a 5 radius, a radius of 5, or even 10. 10 squared is 100, so here would be a really large circle with a radius of 10, and it's centered at 10 comma 10. But maybe that's too far down on the graph for my liking, and I'd rather move it up a little bit. So all I would have to do is change that 10 in there with the y to a larger number like 15. Now it's moved up a little bit on my graph. It's exactly where I want it. Now that I have the circle or the face of my smiley face, let's make a smile. Now, looking at all of my options for parent functions, I would say that the quadratic parent function is going to represent a smile the most. It's a U-shaped graph. So let's just type in here the parent function for a parabola or a quadratic. And you can see I get that nice U shape. Now, unfortunately, it's not where I want it to be, and it's kind of skinny. I'd like it to be a little wider for my smile. So let's start with that. Let's make this parabola wider. I can do that by multiplying my x squared by a number that is less than 1. That will make my graph wider. So I usually start with 0.5, and you can see that's made it a little bit wider, but I would like it to be wider still. So I'm going to decrease that to like 0.4, 0.3, and keep dropping that number until I get the width that I want. And I think I like the width of 0.1 there. Again, you can keep going smaller than that if you need to. Now that I've got the width the way I like it, I would like to move that parabola so that it's in the place where a smile would be. It looks like the center of my parabola, I would like it to be where x is 10. So I'd like to move this right 10 units. In order to move it right, I have to put that minus 10 inside with the x. So I needed to put parentheses around the x and then put the minus 10 inside to move it right or left. And I chose right, so I put minus 10. I'd also like to move this up a little bit. To move it up and down, I have to add or subtract a number at the end of the function. So moving it up, I'm going to add 10, and that's a little bit too high, so I'm going to subtract that 10 and maybe do 8, and I think that looks pretty good. That is a good spot for my smile. Now the thing is, I don't really want my smile to shoot off on both sides of my face that long. I want it to stop. I want it to be cut off somewhere that makes sense so that it stays on the face. Now I can do that by making these squiggly brackets in here with the alphabet is where you would find them. And I can cut off this parabola in a couple of different ways. I can either cut the top off by using y is less than a number, such as y is less than 15 per se. So that would cut the top off, and that works just fine. I can change that number to get it the height that I want. Or I can cut the left and the right sides off, meaning I could say something like, I want x to be between 3 and, 3 and 17 maybe? And that would cut it off nicely as well. So either of those options, cutting the top or cutting the sides, will cut my smile the way I want it to. So now I've got a good start on my smiley face. I'm going to do one more function just so you guys can keep seeing how I'm working through these. And I'm going to try and make a nose for my smiley face. Now I want a pointy nose, so I think I'm going to use the absolute value function, which makes a V shape. So I type y equals the absolute value of x, and there's my parent function here. But I would like my nose to point up instead of pointing down like this one does. So to flip my V shape upside down, I just put a negative sign in front, and now it's going the right direction. Then I need to move it to the location of where the nose should be. So to move it right 10 and center it in my face horizontally, I will have to put minus 10 inside the absolute value symbol, and you can see that my graph has moved right 10. I also need to move it up so that it's right in the center of my face, and that looks like it's at about 15. But I think that's a little low. I actually want to move it a little higher. Whoops. Let's do 17 or 16. I like the look of 16. So let's move it up to 16. Another thing I'd like to do is make it a little narrower. I think it's kind of a wide nose right here. I'd like it to be a little narrower, a little pointier. So I'm going to multiply by a number in front of the absolute value, and I want to choose a number larger than 1 to make it narrower. So I could do 2, I could do 3, it depends on how narrow I want it to be. I kind of like the looks of 2. And then the last thing I'll want to do is chop it off. So once again, I can chop off the left and the right sides of the graph using a restriction like I did for the smile, or I can just chop off the bottom using a restriction on y. So I can just say that I want y to be above 10, or definitely larger than 10, maybe 12, 13, or 14. I like the looks of 14. And now I've got my nose right where I want it to be, cut off on the ends and facing the direction I'd like. Now obviously I can continue with this. I can draw some eyes, some hair, some more facial features, maybe some ears, a neck. I could start drawing a body if I wanted to. There's lots of different directions you can go from here, but I kind of just wanted to get you started so that you understand how you play around with these functions to get it to look the way you want. As you are working on this project, please don't hesitate to ask for help if there's anything you're unsure about how to do, but make sure you are meeting all the requirements on the rubric and that you use your notes, your graphic organizer, and all of the resources at your disposal as you keep going. Good luck and be creative. I can't wait to see what you come up with.